and welcome to episode 41 of the Monday Night Review. I complained last week of having a cold. Turns out I've got the virus, so all my plans for the weekend have been cancelled. I took a test on Thursday night because I had people coming for the weekend. Didn't want to, thought it was the polite thing to do, and it came back positive. So plans cancelled. I'm not feeling great. I feel okay. My husband's been looking after me very well, and I have been sleeping a lot. I've mostly just got a very nasty viral headache that is reminiscent of... I used to get a lot of viruses when I was little. I'm not sure if anyone else did. Maybe just me. One upside is that my brain, which is usually... I always describe my brain as being like one of those metal filing cabinets where you pull out the drawers and there's just loads of folders, and I feel like someone's constantly flipping through those folders. My brain seems to be able to focus on one thing at a time at the moment. So today's episode is going to be pretty epic. It's going to probably be the longest I've done. This one is definitely one for if you got a long car journey. This is a good one. If you've got a long lunch break, you'll be able to eat through it. Nothing gross happened. It's totally fine, but it's possibly one of the most talked about cases in America, and it's something that is ongoingly fascinating. Today we're going to talk about the only unsolved skyjacking in US history, DB Cooper. So yeah, buckle up, make a brew. This is going to be a long one. It all starts on the 24th of November, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. A middle-aged man carrying a black briefcase goes to the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. He buys a one-way ticket on Flight 305 to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. SeaTac, I never knew. I've heard people talk about SeaTac, never knew what it meant. I thought it was literally something to do with the sea. Turns out it's Seattle-Tacoma Airport. He gives the name Dan Cooper, and he buys the ticket in cash. He then boards the 727 aircraft and takes seat 18C. He orders a drink, bourbon and soda, and is described as eyewitnesses as being in his mid-40s, wearing a business suit with a black tie and a white shirt. He sometimes wears sunglasses. One witness says, it was sunny outside, but he didn't remove them, and that was weird. He does remove them at some point, because we have a description of his eyes. But Flight 305 is approximately 1/3 full. It's got about 36 passengers on it, and it leaves Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper hands a note to Florence Schaffner, who is the flight attendant nearest to him, and she just thinks that he's a lonely businessman handing her his phone number. This has obviously happened before. And so she just puts the unopened note in her purse. So Cooper leans over to her and says, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Turns out he's hijacking the plane. So the note is printed in neat all capital letters with a felt tip pen. His exact wording is unknown because Cooper later takes it back. It seems really odd because he leaves other stuff on the plane, but we don't have the note. Did Schaffner secretly keep it? She recalls that it mentions the bomb and says that she's to sit in the seat beside Cooper. She does as the note requests and asks to see the bomb. I'm assuming skyjacking at the time is a fairly common occurrence, so I'm assuming there is protocol that they have been trained to follow. I'm not sure that I would automatically ask to see the bomb. She does. She describes it as 8 red cylinders in 2 rows of 4. She assumes that that's dynamite. There's a small wire attached to the cylinders and a large cylindrical battery that's in the briefcase. And after closing the briefcase, he states his demands, which is $200,000, which is just over 1.5 million US dollars today. In negotiable American currency, he wants 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, He needs a fuel truck to be standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft upon arrival. So Schaffner conveys Cooper's instructions to the pilot in the cockpit. She's then too terrified to leave the cockpit, so Tina Mucklow goes to deal with Cooper. In the cockpit, we've got Captain William A. Scott, and he contacts SeaTac Airport, their air traffic control, and says they need to inform local and federal authorities. So the 35 other passengers are told that their arrival in Seattle is going to be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. Mucklow is incredibly calm, so none of the passengers suspect anything. And Cooper says, get them all up the front of the plane. So Mucklow says, because of this delay, anyone who wants to come and sit up in first class can come and sit in first class. So people take her up on that offer. So in the back is just Mucklow and Cooper. Northwest Orient's president authorises payment of the ransom and says to the employees to cooperate with the hijackers' demands. Aircraft circles Puget Sound for about 2 hours to allow Seattle Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, time to get the parachutes and the ransom money and get all the emergency personnel sorted out. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow says that Cooper seems very familiar with the local terrain. He looks out and says, looks like Tacoma down there. And the aeroplane was flying above it. He also said that McCord Air Force Base is about a 20-minute drive from Seattle Tacoma Airport, which it was, and not many people will have known. Schaffner and Mucklow both say that he is really calm, polite, well-spoken. He's not like your stereotypical skyjacker at the time. He wasn't nervous. Mucklow says he seems rather nice. He was never cruel or nasty. He was thoughtful and calm the whole time. He orders another drink. He pays his drinks tab. He attempts to give Mucklow the change. He requests meals for the flight crew during his stop in Seattle. Mucklow asks Cooper if he has a grudge with Northwest Orient, to which Cooper replies, "I don't have a grudge against your airline, miss. I just have a grudge." FBI agents have assembled the ransom money from several Seattle area banks. They've got 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most of which have serial numbers beginning with the letter L, meaning they're from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and they've made a microfilm photograph of each one. So these notes can be traced. They know every note that is in the Cooper ransom money. Cooper rejects the military issue parachutes that's offered from McCord Air Force Base. He instead demands 4 civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords, and they are obtained by Seattle police from a local skydiving school. That's kind of important to talk about later. Cooper's informed that his demands have been met. The aircraft lands at Seattle Tacoma Airport. There's really heavy rain. It's about an hour after sunset, and Cooper instructs Scott to taxi to an isolated but brightly lit section of the runway, to close all the window shades so that there's no possibility of police snipers taking him out. And then Northwest Orient's Seattle operations manager, Al Lee, approaches the aircraft. He's wearing his home clothes, his street clothing, so that he doesn't get confused by Cooper with a police officer, and he delivers the cash and the parachutes to Mucklow via the aft stairs. So this aeroplane is an aeroplane that's built with stairs that basically come out of the middle at the back, as well as stairs that come out of the side. That's very critical, and that's where Cooper wants everything delivered. He will only allow Mucklow to deliver the money and the chutes to him. So initially, the pilot and his co-pilot had a plan that they'd get everybody off the plane, and then when Tina left, to get things for Cooper, she would stay off the plane. Now, the pilots could leave the cockpit without Cooper noticing because they are in front of first class. So he wouldn't be able to see them leaving. Therefore, he'd be on the plane by himself, and it would change into a sort of captive hostage, Cooper being the captive hostage situation. But Cooper, whether he's prepared for this or it just happens that way, he doesn't let everyone off until he's got what he wants. So Mccoy's having to go and get the money and the parachutes and everything. The one time that he gets angry is he's asked for the money to be delivered in a knapsack. And it's delivered in a laundry bag, and he gets quite angry that it's in a laundry bag, but he's never rude to Mccoy. It's the only time she sees him angry. Once the delivery is completed, Cooper allows all the passengers off. He allows Schaffner and senior flight attendant Alice Hancock to leave the plane, and the passengers are taken, obviously they're in a faraway part of the airport, so a bus is sent to pick the passengers up, and when they get back to the terminal, they do a roll call. And one of the witnesses says when they get to the name Dan Cooper and no one responds, and they repeat Dan Cooper, there's no response. And nobody's panicked about this, and he says it's the first time he then in hindsight realizes that's when they first get a name for whoever is hijacking the plane. Now, Tina and the other flight attendants have kept so calm the whole time that it's not until afterwards that anybody on the plane knows that there was a hijacking situation. They completely believe the story of there being a mechanical fault, and everyone is completely calm. So the refueling process is delayed. They need a second and then a third truck to bring in to complete the refueling. During this time, the FBI requests a face-to-face meeting with Cooper on the aircraft, and he denies it. He then grows really impatient, saying this shouldn't be taking so long, and he sends a note to the crew saying, let's get this show on the road. Whilst all this has been going on, Cooper, via Mccoy, has outlined his flight plan to the cockpit crew. He wants to take a southeast course towards Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, which is about 100 knots, 185 kilometers an hour, 115 miles per hour. If you've done 115 miles per hour in your car, which I have many years ago, it feels very fast in a car. I can imagine it feels very bloody slow in an aeroplane. So he wants them cruising at a maximum of 10,000 feet, which is one thing, but actually it's more like 5,000 feet because they're going over mountain ranges. So there's that has dangers. He also specifies that he wants the landing gear to remain deployed in the takeoff landing position. He wants the wing flaps to be lowered 15 degrees and the cabin to remain unpressurized. This is all incredibly specific and knowledgeable instructions. Again, we'll get onto that more later. So First Officer William Rasacek informs Cooper that the aircraft's range is limited to approximately 1,000 miles under that flight configuration, which means they wouldn't make it to Mexico on the fuel that they had. So they'd need to stop for more refueling. So Cooper and the crew discuss the options and agree on Reno Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Cooper further directs that when the aircraft takes off, it must have the rear exit door open and its aft stair extended. So Northwest Home Office say that it's so unsafe, they're just not going to do it. So Cooper says that's fine, he's going to do it once they're airborne. So they basically got an idea of what he's planning on doing. At approximately 7:40 p.m, the Boeing 727 takes off with only Cooper, Mccoy, Captain Scott, First Officer Rasacek, and Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson on board. Rasacek, I'm going to give him a shout out later, but he says that the other two men in the cockpit said, we do have the option of getting off without him noticing and leaving Tina on board. He doesn't seem like an angry man. We could save ourselves in this situation. And Ratajczak said, I cannot leave this plane and leave Tina on it by herself. So he's a really stand-up guy. So the plane takes off. 2 F-106 fighter aircraft from McCoy Air Force Base follow behind, one above, one below, out of Cooper's view, and a Lockheed T-33 trainer, diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission, also shadows the 727 before running low on fuel and having to turn back near the Oregon-California state line. It's unclear whether Cooper knows that he's being followed. Again, we'll talk about that more later. But if he does have military training, we would assume that he would know that they would send someone to trace him. So after takeoff, Cooper wants Tina to open the aft door. So Ratajczak says to Mccoy he's going to come and tie cushions and ropes around her waist and tie her to something before she can open the cabin door so that she doesn't get sucked out of the plane when the doors open. Cooper says no one's to come back there. So Ratajczak, not to be put off, says fine, he's not going to come there. And he says to Tina, open one of those parachutes, cut some line and tie it around your waist and tie yourself to somewhere as far away from the door as you can get. Cooper says, look, don't worry, tells Mccoy to go and join the rest of the crew in the cockpit and remain there when the curtains close. When you see Ratajczak talking about that moment 40, 50 years later, he still cries thinking about when Tina comes through because he was just so relieved that she was safe. Just before 8 p.m, Cooper contacts the crew to say he can't get the aft stairs to go down. So the crew have to slow the plane right down to almost stalling point. And they alert him to try again. When they're going this low, ice starts to form on the wings and it becomes really dangerous. So they're taking a huge risk. At approximately 8 o'clock, a warning light flashes in the cockpit saying that the aft air stair apparatus has been activated. So the pilots again go on the cabin intercom and say, does Cooper need any assistance? Cooper picks up the cabin phone and says no, and that's the last message they hear from him. The crew then notice a change of air pressures, indicating that now the aft door is open, the door that leads to those stairs. And at approximately 8:13 p.m, the aircraft's tail section does a sudden upward movement, big enough that they have to adjust the level of the plane, and they don't know what's going on, so they just continue on their way, and they eventually land between 10 and 11:30 p.m. at Reno Tahoe International Airport, where they've agreed to stop for refueling. When they arrive, FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff deputies, Reno police, they're all there waiting for them. And they stay back, they don't approach the plane in case the bomb is still live. They have no idea what's going on. And Captain Scott confirms that Cooper is no longer on board. And then the FBI bomb squad come on board. They report the cabin clear after a 30-minute sweep. There's nothing there. So yeah, Ratajczak deserves a shout out. He spoke for the crew afterwards at a press conference. He completely supported Tina throughout, as I'm sure the others did. Scott had to manually fly the plane at those specifications. He couldn't cruise control, so it wasn't that he wasn't a busy man, but I really feel like Ratajczak just kept his shit together. He had the opportunity to leave Tina, and he insisted on staying. Also, Tina, she says that when she was shown the bomb, her first thought was how she was going to help the passengers when the cabin became depressurized when the bomb went off. And she said, then I realized that I'm sitting next to him and I'm going to be sucked out of the plane and blown to pieces as well. And she just didn't lose it. She kept it together. So FBI agents are all over this plane. They recover 1,000 latent fingerprints aboard the airliner, and 66 of these remain unidentified. They also find 3 major pieces of evidence. So he's taken the note that he gave to the air hostess with him, but they find a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, and 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts. Now, at some point after the hijacking, the cigarette butts were lost, but we know that in the 70s, the dealing with a crime scene is so much different to how you would deal with it now, because the advances in DNA technology was so different that probably it's all contaminated and you wouldn't be able to get much from it anyway, but you probably would be able to rule people out, and that's sad that they're not there. So the agents also find 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which has been opened and 2 of the lines cut from the canopy. So I think, and others believe this too, that obviously if you're going to parachute out of a plane, you need your hands free. You don't want to be carrying a laundry bag full of money, which is why he'd requested a knapsack. And so I think he made the laundry bag into a knapsack using the 2 bits of rope that he cut from this parachute. Authorities interview eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, and an artist completes 2 composite sketches, mainly from sitting with Schaffner and Mccoy, who spent the most time with him. Mccoy spent 5 hours sitting with him, so she really is the witness for D.B. Cooper. A search begins immediately, and the press are all over this immediately. How it must have started to compare to how it ends is huge, because if you see FBI agents who were involved in the initial hunt, they're all like, yep, we just assumed we'd find him alive. They assumed they'd find him alive. He would be easily caught. There was no way that he was getting away. He was probably injured. And the media probably thought the same. Now, it's worth mentioning that he signs his name Dan Cooper. At some point, it is misreported as DB Cooper in the press on a radio station, and that sticks. That is why he's referred to as DB Cooper. It is literally a mistake. He is technically Dan Cooper. So they begin this search immediately. They find it really difficult to define a precise area where he may have landed. There was a heavy storm. It was dark. They were doing an unusual route, not necessarily unusual to fly from airport to airport, but obviously it was not a normal route for that crew and that plane. They were obviously flying with their flaps at 15 degrees. At one point the stairs were down. They had their landing gear down. And also the most variable thing of all was how long did Cooper remain in freefall before deploying his parachute. So neither of the Air Force pilots following saw anything leaving the airliner, and they didn't see anything on the radar. They didn't see the parachute open, but it's at night, it's rainy, it's dark. You know, he's wearing black. So, you know, it's not really surprising that they didn't see anything. So they do an experimental recreation. They use the same aircraft and the same flight configuration, and they push a 200-pound, 91-kilo sled out of the open aft stair, and they were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section that the flight staff had felt, almost as if when someone jumps off a diving board and you see it bounce back after they've left, it felt like that. So they can recreate that, so they feel like that's definitely what happened. He jumped off the stairs or fell off the stairs. That's what they felt. So they've got a sort of precise-ish timing for it, because it was 8:13 p.m. So They place Cooper's landing zone within an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, which is an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. So this lake has loads of lights around it. Some people believe that Cooper will have used the lights of the dam as something to aim for in the dark skydive. Search efforts focused on the Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. It's a very wooded area. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the mountainous wilderness on foot and by helicopter. They do door-to-door searches of local farmhouses. They run patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yule Lake. There's no trace of Cooper. There's nothing. They don't find any of the equipment. They don't find any evidence of the parachute. So the FBI coordinate an aerial search, and they fly along the entire flight path, which is known as Victor 23 in aviation terminology, but quite often referred to as Vector 23 in Cooper literature. So all the way from Seattle to Reno, they fly along this and they see numerous broken treetops. They see several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies, but they're all investigated and nothing relevant to the hijacking is found. In the spring of 1972, FBI agents are back out there with 200 US Army soldiers from Fort Lewis, US Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, civilian volunteers. Everyone's involved. They do a really thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties. It takes them 18 days. And then they do another 18 days a month later. They have a company and a marine salvage firm that uses a submarine to go 200 foot down in Lake Merwin to see if they can find anything. They find nothing. 2 local women find a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County, but this is later identified as the remains of Barbara Ann Derry, who's a teenage girl who'd been abducted and murdered several weeks before. I mean, she'd never have been found, probably, if they weren't doing this search. So they find nothing related to the hijacking. It's very weird. A month after the hijacking, they distribute lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, law enforcement agencies all over the world. Anywhere where you can deal with money, they give them the serial numbers. Northwest Orient offer a reward of up to $25,000, and lots of people put up rewards. Nothing comes of it. Early 1973, ransom money still missing. None of it's been used. There more rewards are coming up. Literally, they have lots of people trying to swindle, get the reward unfairly, but nothing is working. So everyone's involved in this. Immediately, it becomes like this big story. Everyone wants to find D.B. Cooper. A subsequent analysis of the landing zone and the flight path and all of that, including Captain Scott, who's flying the aircraft manually because of the speed and the altitude demands and all of that. He determines that his flight path is further east than initially assumed. So they recalculate where the drop zone would have been. They also have pilots who are very into what I would refer to as the geeky side of aviation, and they work out the wind direction and the drop zone and all of that. And so it turns out that they think it's actually southeast of the original estimate in the drainage area of the Washougal River. So this is now, the Washougal Valley has been searched by numerous individuals and groups. There's been, again, no evidence found there at all. Some believe that there was the eruption of Mount St. Helen in 1980 will have obliterated any remaining physical clues, but people have been searching there for 9 years. Nothing's come up. One thing that is found in November 1978, printed instructions for lowering the aft stairs on a 727 was found by a deer hunter near a logging road east of Castle Rock in Washington. It's well north of Lake Merwin, but it's within the basic flight path. And it's confirmed that it's the plastic instruction card from the flight hijacked by Cooper. So initially, I was like, why has he written instructions down? It's not. It's if you imagine sitting, if you're one of those tall people that gets to sit near the exit on a plane, they now have stickers on the windows that say how to open the door. It's the plastic instruction card from the flight saying how you open the door. So that's a very good bit of evidence. There's nothing to indicate when that fell out of the plane, because they had to fly for another couple of hours with the stairs down and the door open. That could have been sucked out at any time during the flight. Could have gone before Cooper left the plane or way after. On the 10th of February 1980, 8-year-old Bryant Ingram is camping with his family on the Columbia River in an area known as Tina Bar, which is about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington. He is raking at the sandy riverbank to get an area to build a campfire for his dad, and he finds 3 packets of cash totaling around £5,800. His dad phones the police, gives them some serial numbers and says, check these out, I'm going to call back in 10 minutes. And when he calls back in 10 minutes, they confirm that he has found some of the Cooper ransom monies. So the bills have disintegrated after lengthy exposure to the elements, but they're still bundled in rubber bands, and it opens a whole new can of worms, because there's a whole load of speculation as to how these can have got there. They have investigators, scientific consultants, all talking about how these wads of money will have got there. Did Cooper land in the river and die and the money's washed up on the beach? The thing that they've worked out, though, is that elastic bands last up to 6 months out in the elements and no longer, and these elastic bands were still intact, which means they cannot have been lying on that beach for 9 years. So there's loads of hypotheses about how the money got there. They've worked out that it couldn't have been buried there by a person. There's a lot there, and we're never quite sure about how they get there. So they believe that the money entered the water months after the hijacking, not at the time of the hijacking, but we've still got the problem with the elastic bands. So nothing else really comes of it until late 2007, when the FBI announced that a partial DNA profile has been obtained from samples found on Cooper's tie in 2001. So obviously we've got no evidence that it's the hijacker's DNA on the tie. Could be anyone's. It's a JCPenney clip-on tie. We don't know that the hijacker bought it new. We don't know that he didn't just pick it up in a second hand. Do you know what I mean? We have no idea. But anything, I think, is useful in terms of being able to rule people out. When we start talking about possible suspects, I think then at least DNA becomes useful, because if you've got a possible suspect, you think they might have done it, all of that, and then their DNA is on the tie, well, that's helpful. The tie's got 2 small DNA samples and 1 large sample, but, it's difficult to draw firm conclusions from these, and In July 2016, the FBI announced that they're suspending active investigations. So since 1971 until July 2016, the FBI have always had at least one man on the DB Cooper case. But they basically close it in 2016. And unless someone finds more of the money or the parachute, they're not looking at anything else. They've got a 66-volume case file compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation, which is at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and all the information is on the FBI website, and all the evidence is now open to the public. In 2009, the FBI disclosed that Tom Kay, who's a paleontologist, had assembled a team of citizen sleuths. They've been looking at minute particles found on Cooper's tie, and they've narrowed it down to, they've found things like fragments of bismuth, aluminium, unalloyed titanium. All of these are much rarer in the 1970s, which sort of implies that perhaps Cooper might have worked with metal or chemical manufacturing. And in 2017, Kay reports that rare earth minerals such as cerium and strontium sulfide, sorry if I'm butchering that, have also been found on the tie, which are seriously rare, and in the 1970s were part of Boeing's supersonic transport development project. So that points to the possibility that Cooper was a Boeing employee, but again, it's all very vague. We don't really know. So the official description of Cooper has remained unchanged. Is considered reliable. The flight attendants Schaffner and Mccoy spent the most time with Cooper. They were interviewed the same night as the hijacking in two separate cities. Schaffner was in Seattle, Mccoy is in Reno, and they give nearly identical descriptions. About 5'10" tall, 180 pounds, mid-40s, close-set, piercing brown eyes and swarthy skin. So Cooper appears to be familiar with the Seattle area. He may have been an Air Force veteran. He, as I said, he recognised the city of Tacoma from the air. He knew that McCord Air Force Base was 20 minutes driving time from the airport. Most civilians wouldn't know about this. Ralph Himmelsbach, who's a FBI retired investigator, says, it's likely that his financial situation was really desperate, or that he's a thrill seeker and wanted to just prove that his hijack could be done. I actually think he wanted to fuck someone over, to put it delicately. And what I find very intriguing about this case is the FBI's opinion of their suspect. Now, obviously, they are trained to put profiles together. And initially, they say they're looking for someone very skilled, lots of knowledge about planes and parachuting in the area. And quite quickly, they change their tune and basically say that he's an idiot. He's a chancer. There's no way that he could have survived. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's made bad decisions. But lots of experts, and me, disagree with this. He knew how the plane could fly. He was able to have conversations with the crew about where to land and refuel. This is an era pre the internet, so it's not like, today everyone can become an expert on everything. If you were going to do this today, you could research planes, which plane, how to fly the plane, do anything. Not so in the 70s. He knew what angle the flaps needed to be at, how fast it could go before stalling. He basically knew the plane well than the pilots did. So for the FBI to pass him off as not an expert is kind of weird. He could have worked at Boeing. He could have worked at Air America. So Air America was famous, but they had lots of classified information regarding being in a CIA front to perform top secret missions under the guise of civilian missions. And they used, for those missions, something called squidding, which we're going to talk about in a minute, to get people out of their 727 planes, which they used. So did D.B. Cooper know about this? Was he involved in Air America in some way? The FBI originally were like, yep, we're going to go out, we're going to find this guy alive. Then they become very much like he lacked crucial skydiving skills and experience. An ex-FBI guy says, we originally thought Cooper was an experienced jumper, perhaps even a paratrooper. We concluded after a few years that this is simply not true. No experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch black night in the rain with 172-mile-an-hour wind in his face, wearing loafers and a trench coat. It was simply too risky. Cooper just also failed to bring or request a helmet, chose to jump with an older and technically inferior of the two primary parachutes, and jumped into a probable 15-degree Fahrenheit wind without proper protection against the extreme wind chill. This bit I find really interesting. The FBI says that Cooper has chosen the older of the two primary parachutes supplied to him rather than the superior professional sport parachute that's got padded straps and you could steer it. And he selected a dummy by accident. So the FBI, by accident, give him a dummy parachute. They state that it's an accident. They went to the Seattle Skydiving School and got 4 parachutes, and one of those was a dummy, and one of those is one that Cooper took. I have no explanation for this, for why he took the dummy. I don't know. But they bang on about his bad choice of parachutes, but master skydiver Mark Milster disagrees. He says Cooper chose a C9 canopy, the toughest canopy ever made. He calls it the pit bull of all parachutes. He said if he had to do the DB Cooper jump and he could pick any parachute, the C9 canopy is the one he would choose over the other one that they had on the plane. He says it's a very survivable jump, that anyone with experience could have used the squidding technique, which allows for the gentle opening of the parachute. So basically, Milster explains that squidding is when you open the parachute and allow the pull to gently propel you off wherever you're standing. And so the parachute, rather than opening basically like a jellyfish shape, looks more like a squid and is gently filled with air. And that is how Air America used to get people off their planes off the aft stairs. You'd open your parachute and sort of be pulled off the stairs. And he says that if you deployed your parachute on the stairs, it would gently pull you off and you would have a really fine landing, and also you'd be less detectable. He has absolutely no he's the skydiver, of all the people they speak to who have experienced skydiving, he's the one who's like, yeah, you could do it, it doesn't matter what you're wearing, and in loafers you could just do it and you would totally survive it. So what I find really intriguing about DB Cooper is, the thing is, if he died, something would have been found. The searches are really intensive. They had planes, they had helicopters going over a huge area. People have been looking for his body, parachute, skeleton, ransom money. Something would have been found. They believe that if he did die in the jump, it was his parachute didn't deploy, because you would have seen the parachute if he'd got caught in the trees, you'd see the parachute from the air. So they believe that if he died, it meant his parachute didn't deploy. Maybe he slipped on the steps and hit his head and fell off the thing. I think he did the squidding thing and was totally fine. I think he knew what he was doing. There's more people looking for DB Cooper than looking for Loch Ness Monster. There's whole symposiums dedicated to DB Cooper. I think they would have found him. If you die on the way down and your body has become a skeleton, then, everything, even if you're stuck in the tree, things are going to drop off. And I don't mean body parts, although that too, probably. But, where's the suitcase with the bomb? Where's the money? Where's the parachute? Where are the rest of his clothes? Where are his sunglasses? Something would have been found if he'd died. This bothers me. In 1976, discussion arose over the impending expiration on the statute of limitations on the hijacking. And in November, a Portland grand jury returned an indictment in absentia against John Doe, aka Dan Cooper, for air piracy, which means it's formally initiated prosecution, and this can be continued at any time should the hijacker be found. So if they find the hijacker today, they can prosecute. And I wish they hadn't done this, because it means he's never going to come forward. No one's ever going to admit to it, because they'll be prosecuted. Why would they admit to it now? They've got away with it. You're not suddenly going to turn around and admit to it. And in many ways, this is a victimless crime. Nobody dies. It's obviously a horrible experience for the crew. But I would argue that the horrible experience for the crew has been, for the last 50 years, everyone wanting to talk to them about DB Cooper and ask them questions. And in fact, had DB Cooper come forward and they knew who they were, they could have moved on with their lives. So over the years, the FBI have processed over 1,000 people that they thought were serious suspects in the DB Cooper case, and we're going to look at some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. So, first up is Richard Floyd McCoy. He's the most obvious choice. He's an Army veteran who served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, first as a demolition expert and later with the Green Berets as a helicopter pilot. After his military service, he became a warrant officer in the Utah National Guard. He's an avid recreational skydiver, and he wants to become a Utah State Trooper. On the 7th of April 1972, just 6 months after the DB Cooper hijacking, he boards a United Airlines Flight 855, which is also a Boeing 727 with aft stairs, in Denver, Colorado. And brandishing what's later proved to be a paperweight, but it resembles a hand grenade, and he's got an unloaded handgun. He demands 4 parachutes, $500,000, and after delivery of the money and parachutes at San Francisco International Airport, he orders the aircraft back into the sky and bails out over Utah, leaving behind his handwritten note, his hijacking instructions, and his fingerprints on a magazine that he'd been reading. He's then arrested on the 9th of April, 2 days later. He's got the ransom cash in his possession, and he's convicted. He gets a 45-year sentence. So 2 years into his sentence, he escapes from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. He's got a couple of accomplices, and they crash a garbage truck through the main gate. And he appears 3 months later in Virginia Beach. He breaks into the house of one of the FBI agents who's arrested him and tries to shoot him, and the agent shoots back, and McCoy is killed. So for a lot of people, he's the top suspect for DB Cooper. There's a lot of similarities between the two hijackings, obviously. McCoy's family say the mother of pearl tie clip left on the plane when Cooper hijacked it belonged to McCoy. McCoy's own refusal to admit or deny that he was Cooper. He looks very similar to the sketches of Cooper. The FBI agent who killed McCoy says, when I shot Richard McCoy, I shot DB Cooper at the same time. However, FBI do not consider McCoy to be DB Cooper. They've ruled him out as a suspect. There's evidence that he was in Las Vegas the day of the Portland hijacking, and he's at home in Utah having Thanksgiving dinner with his family the day after. So it's really useful, actually, that Thanksgiving is the day after the hijacking of DB Cooper, because not many Americans are not going to know what they were doing for Thanksgiving. What I found really interesting, though, is that McCoy proves that it can be done. Now, his weather conditions are better, but he proves that it can be done, and he does it successfully. However, I don't think he's DB Cooper. I don't think you would, if you've used a bomb and it's gone well, why you would suddenly change and be unarmed or, using fake things. So next up, we've got Barbara Dayton. She's an experienced pilot and aviator, but Dayton's a woman, I hear you cry. Well, she's the first person to receive gender reassignment surgery in Washington just 2 years before the Cooper hijacking. She was born Robert Dayton. She served in the US Merchant Marine and then in the Army during World War II. After discharge, she worked with explosives in the construction field, and she wanted to be a professional airline pilot, but wasn't allowed to get her pilot's license. I think that is to do with her sexuality. She's bitter about it. She claims to friends that she staged the Cooper hijacking, presenting as a man in order to get back at the airline industry who made it impossible for her to become an airline pilot. She said that the ransom money was hidden in a cistern in Oregon, and she does eventually recant the entire story, but the people she tells believe that it's her. She doesn't look at all like the description, and the FBI's never commented publicly on Dayton, but you know, I love the fact that she's up there with the running. We got Kenneth Peter Christensen. In 2003, Lyle Christianson watches a TV documentary about Cooper and becomes convinced that his brother Kenneth, who died in 1994, was Cooper. He tries to convince the FBI, and that doesn't work, but he convinces a private detective who then writes a book about it. So Christiansen enlisted in the army in 1944 and was trained as a paratrooper. After leaving the army, he joined Northwest Orient in 1954 as a mechanic in the South Pacific and subsequently became a flight attendant, then a purser based in Seattle. He was 45 years old at the time, and though he was shorter and thinner than the descriptions of Cooper, Christensen smoked, he drank the same drink, although I wouldn't say that was unusual for men in the 70s to smoke and drink bourbon. And Schaffner says that the photos of Christensen fit her memory of the hijacker more closely than those of other suspects she's been shown, but she can't conclusively identify him. The thing is, he worked for the airline after the Cooper hijacking. So I think if you're hijacking a plane from the company that you work for, the chances of someone recognising you is pretty high. I just don't think the FBI say that his skydiving expertise is above that of predicted their suspect profile, which I think it's below, frankly. I think they're dealing with someone who knows a lot about skydiving. Then we've got Dwayne Weber. So Weber was a World War II Army veteran. He's a paratrooper. He served time in at least 6 prisons from 1945 to 1968 for burglary and forgery. He confesses to his wife on his deathbed to being Dan Cooper. She's got no idea who Dan Cooper is. So she tells this to a friend of hers who's like, well, that's DB Cooper. So then his wife goes to the local library to research Cooper. She finds a book on Cooper and notes in the margin written by her husband. I suspect that maybe that was just a fantasist thing, him wanting to be DB Cooper. So he fits the physical description. He's got a criminal background, which they believe that DB Cooper would have had. But he's eliminated as a suspect in 1998 when his fingerprints don't match any of those on the hijacked plane. Then we've got Sheridan Peterson, who's originally the FBI's prime suspect. He's the first person they go to, and he's a bit of a badass. He's a professional smoke jumper. He joined the Marine Corps in World War II. He's later employed as a technical editor at Boeing, based in Seattle, and they think it's him because he's got a love of taking physical risks. If there's anything going on that needs someone to be a bit of a badass, he's there. He's similar in age and appearance to the Cooper descriptions, and he does mess about with the media about whether he's Cooper or not. But when pressed, Peterson says he was in Nepal at the time of the hijacking with his family, and when interviewed before he died, he said no smoke jumper would jump in a pair of loafers and no coat. So he is another person who actually really believes that Cooper probably didn't make the jump. He didn't survive the jump. Then we've got Lynn Doyle L.D. Cooper, who's a paratrooper in the Korean War, and his brother, who's very close to, worked for Boeing. LD's niece, Marla Cooper, came forward with him as a suspect in July 2011. She recalls that when she was 8, her uncles, LD and another uncle, were up to something. They had got some very expensive walkie-talkies that could work up to a mile apart. They were really excited about it. And she was with them. They were at their grandmother's house in Oregon, about 150 miles southeast of Portland, and playing with these walkie-talkies. Now, the next day, the flight was hijacked, and though the uncles were apparently turkey hunting, LD Cooper comes home wearing a really bloody T-shirt, and he says it's the result of a motorbike accident. And then later Marla claims that her parents came to believe that LD was the hijacker with the help of his brother. So in August 2011, New York Magazine published an alternative witness sketch based on eyewitness Robert Gregory, saying D.B. Cooper was actually wearing horn-rimmed sunglasses, a russet-coloured suit jacket with wide lapels, and had marshalled hair, which fits with the look of L.D. Cooper. But the FBI said they've got no fingerprints that match L.D. Cooper's, and his DNA doesn't match the partial DNA profile obtained from the tie, although obviously, as I've said before, we don't know that DNA came from the hijacker. So then Bryant Jack Cofult, he's a con man, ex-convict, alleged government informant. So in 1972, he starts claiming that he's Cooper, and he tries to get his former cellmate, James Brown, not the James Brown, to sell his story to the Hollywood production company. He says he lands near Mount Hood, which is about 50 miles southeast of Ariel, and he injured himself and lost the ransom money in the process. So he does look a bit like the composite drawings. He was reportedly in Portland on the day of the hijacking, and he did sustain leg injuries around the same time that were consistent with the skydiving mishap. But after being reviewed by the FBI, they realised that the details he has were details that were available to the public, and when they quiz him on details that weren't available to the public, he gets confused and doesn't have anything. So then we get to the guy who, if I had to put my money on one of these people being him, it's this guy, but I don't think it is this guy. Robert Wesley Rackstraw. So he is the focus of a really intensive investigation by Thomas Colbert and Jim Forbes, who are investigative journalists. He does have a grudge. He has the skills needed, and he is very weird whenever he's interviewed about being D.B. Cooper. Rackstraw's a retired pilot, ex-convict. He served in the Army helicopter crew and other units during the Vietnam War. He's got an incredible military record. He's known to be brave, fearless, great teacher, great soldier. He has 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses and a Silver Star. He's in the Army for over 7 years. Whatever training there is to be done, he's done it and excelled at it. He's really found his niche, and the authorities discover that he's falsified his college documents. He never went to college, and they kick him out. That's it. No warning, just like that. This happens 5 months before D.B. Cooper hijacks the plane. He comes to the attention of the Cooper Task Force in February 1978. They realise that he gets arrested for forging checks. And when they go to pick him up, he's not home. And so they find in his house £150 of explosives. So they add this to his charges. And when they do track him down, he's flying back to California, I think from France, but I cannot remember. And they have FBI men on the plane following him, which I think says that they must have really suspected him of being Cooper, because the FBI don't do that for a check forger. So he gets arrested, he gets released on bail, and while he's out on bail, he hires a plane, and then sends in a distress call saying that his plane's engine has caught fire and he's going to have to bail out over Monterey Bay. No evidence of his plane or him is found, and he's then later tracked down in California. Forging federal pilot certificates is now added to his list of crimes. The plane he claimed to have ditched is found. It's in a nearby disused airport hangar. He's repainted it. He's changed the numbers on it. And Cooper investigators note his physical resemblance to Cooper composite sketches, although he was only 28 in 1971. But he has done 7 years in the army. He has been at Vietnam. That's going to take its toll on your face. What I find very interesting is when they are showing witnesses his picture, there's one picture and they're like, no. And then they show a different picture and they're like, that's it. Because he looks quite different depending on what his hair and his weight are doing. So the FBI, he's eliminated a suspect in 1979, but Colbert and Forbes re-emerge him as a suspect in 2016. So they interview loads of people connected to him about the case, including his half-sister, who tells them that they have a skydiving uncle called Ed Cooper, who was somewhat idolised by Rackstraw, and she thinks that if Rackstraw had been really angry about being kicked out of the army, which he was, she could imagine him doing the hijacking as a two fingers up to the government and to the army. Colbert builds a really compelling case that's basically built around 1971. This man, Norman de Winter, appears a month after Rackstraw leaves the army, and when his half-sister says that they have no idea where Rackstraw is, Norman de Winter appears in a town called Astoria in Washington, very near the drop zone. And he's a pilot, he's got a plane, and he talks a lot about flying with the residents, and he says he's going to charter a plane to take them all to his native Switzerland. And when one of the women looks into the possibility of him chartering a plane, she finds that no such person exists. At the same time, Norman de Winter disappears. Then a month or so later, he appears as Norman at a college party in Corvallis, Oregon, and he stays sleeping on this sofa for a couple of days. And he leaves the day before Thanksgiving. Corvallis is about 2 hours away from Portland Airport, where Dan Cooper boards the plane to Seattle that afternoon. People at the party and from the town of Astoria recognise Rackstraw as being Norman and Norman de Winter. And the people in Astoria say at the time, when the D.B. Cooper thing came forward, they were like, oh, that's Norman de Winter. He must be D.B. Cooper. So the people in Astoria are convinced that Norman de Winter is D.B. Cooper. And Colbert has got them basically identifying Rackstraw as Norman de Winter, but there is obviously no proof to any of this. What I find very interesting is, why would Rackstraw, who is trained in undercover ops, is trained to blend in, create new personas and all of that, what is he doing as Norman de Winter if he is not looking at the drop zone and planning it? He's not doing any other criminal activity. So why have a new name? Why not just be there staying as yourself? There's no reason for him to be being someone else, because there's no criminal activity he's carrying out. He's also very evasive when you see him interviewed. He says things like, I wouldn't discount myself. I can't answer a question. When they say, are you D.B. Cooper? He says, I can't answer a question like that. Why not say no? But also, he doesn't court the press. So normally if someone's being like that, you'd think, oh, they love the attention. Not necessarily. He just seems to be evasive and then keep himself to himself. In 2017, Colbert and a group of volunteer investigators uncover what they believe to be a decades-old parachute strap at an undisclosed location in the Pacific Northwest. Then in 2017, later on, they find a piece of foam which they suspect to being part of Cooper's parachute backpack. In 2018, Tom and Donna Colbert, they say they've obtained a confession letter written in December 1971 containing codes that match 3 units Rackstraw was part of while in the army, but there is not a lot made of this, which makes me believe that it's been disproved. So in one of the only interviews she's ever done, Tina Mccoy doesn't think, when she's shown photos of Rackstraw from the 1970s and looks at a video of him, she doesn't think that Rackstraw is D.B. Cooper. And ultimately, that's what you have to go on. She spent 5 hours with him. And even though it is 40 years in between when she sees the pictures and when she saw D.B. Cooper, you'd think that she would recognise him. And she doesn't. Rackstraw's attorney says that the allegations are the stupidest thing he's ever heard. He basically gets upset that everyone keeps digging this up, but then he at some point says that he may be Cooper and isn't. He's kind of a compelling person to watch if you get a chance to look at interviews with him. I would. He dies in 2019. Now, interestingly, probably not related, but on April 23rd, 2013, Earl Cossey, the owner of the skydiving school that gave the 4 parachutes to Cooper, is found dead in his home in Washington, a suburb of Seattle. His death's ruled as a homicide due to blunt force trauma, and though the perpetrator remains unknown, some people say that it's linked to the Cooper case, but authorities say they just believe it's a botched robbery. It's just quite interesting. It would, I mean, the crime lover in me wants this to be linked to Cooper. It's such a strange case. The FBI and so many investigators are so involved in it. There's so many more important cases knocking around. I know that it was a horrible experience for the crew members involved, but no one died. Yes, he got away with a lot of money, but he hasn't spent, none of this money has been used. I just find it very interesting that the FBI have been so hot on it for so long, and obviously now they've technically closed it. It's just it's just incredible how it has captured the imagination, and some people are just so obsessed with it, and I don't think we'll ever know. I think D.B. Cooper's probably dead by now, and I don't think we'll ever know who it was. As Jim Forbes says, anyone who gets into this case comes up with a dead end and wastes a lot of time doing it. And that is the story of D.B. Cooper. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I told you it was a long one. As always, I'm going to put up pictures on our social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook. You can find us at The Monday Night Review. You can find us at themondaynightrevue.blogspot, where you can see all previous episodes. And you can also buy me a coffee, which would be very nice of you, and join our Patreon. There are different tiers and different things for different tiers. So, hopefully next time I speak to you, I will have clear COVID tests and can go forth into the world once again. I'm loving receiving your ghost stories that I'm to look into and your other true crime stuff, so please send me a message if you've got something you want me to look into or cover, or you have a story that you want to share. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, always check the back seats before you drive.